we'll be talking about depth hoar, deep slabs, delayed action avalanches, slab boundaries, and the human factor. So when I'm talking about depth hoar, you know, it's kind of a generic term. It's just, what is depth hoar? It's a stage of development of the facets. Yeah, we all know that. I'm thinking of depth hoar with a grain size of around 3 millimeters, just to give you an idea where I'm coming from. There can be some rounding on it, which we typically have here in the Intermountain area and the continental snowpack. Very often we'll have our facet development with no rounding at all. The 2 patrol fatalities in December bothered me. The one at Alpine, I don't know what the route there was, but the avalanche ran above the patroller that died in the avalanche. There's a good account of the snowmass fatality on the CAIC webpage, and she was out doing a little ski checking, as I perceive it, in a permanently closed area. Got too low. The avalanche released above her, and she was carried over the cliff and didn't survive the ride. So I began thinking about some of the avalanche fatalities involving the patrollers on the payroll that I'm familiar with. The first was in 1964. A good friend of mine died on Snow King Mountain, just outside of Jackson. This is before the big ski area opened. He was the full-time weekday tape patroller. Knocked off the cornice, went along the ridge, got up to the top of the ridge. The cornice ran out, and he was stomping on the slab below the rollover, and nothing happened. He got down lower, kept stomping. It broke above him on depth hoar. The snowmass avalanche also broke on depth hoar. And then we fast forward to 1981 at Snowmass again. A patroller by the name of Roberto, and this is written up in Snowy Torrents 1980 to 86, which I highly recommend you all review if you're out there throwing bombs, running routes. Roberto took a course with me and left an impression of, you know, this guy is kind of dangerous. And sure enough, in 81, he was out running a route in one of their expansion areas, the Hanging Valley, cliff band, bench, the transition, middle bench, and they were standing on the lower bench through the bomb that released above them on the upper bench. Then he went over the cliff band, died in the avalanche. Then in 1984, the avalanche really set us back on our heels. Aspen Highlands Bowl. Tremendous big bowl avalanche pad, just scary as hell to look at. And they ran their routes, the 3 snow safety folks, Kessler, Snyder, and Soddy, had all taken courses from me. Ran the top of the ridge through the bombs, and you're really not affecting the main part of the slab because you can't throw your 2-pounders that far. And nothing happened. They skied down to a transition in the middle of the bowl through the bomb, neglected to ski out of the bowl, released below them, and then fractured up above them, released above them. They all 3 died in the avalanche. Fast forward again to January of 2010 at Jackson Hole. This particular bowl had not been opened yet that year, a low snow year. But they were running a route, and a seasoned patroller, been running that route for years and years, threw his bomb, ran on depth fractured above him, died in the avalanche. So what in the heck is going on? These 2 patrol fatalities come from excellent snow safety programs. Snow mats, when they started to expand, a fellow by the name of Hal Hartman established up to the standard of the industry program Alpine Meadows since they opened in, I believe it was 1960, with a who's who of Avalanche workers, Norm Wilson, Chris Steffen, good program. So what's going on? Well, here's my story. It was either 91 or 92. That's as close as I could date this avalanche course that I was running for Colorado outward bound out of Leadville, right in the middle of depth 4 country, USA. And 35 students taking the semester course. I was teaching the course. I was the head instructor, but I had several outward bound mountaineer type instructors working with me. And this particular day we were headed out in the field, loaded up the vans, 35 students and 5 or 6 instructors, and headed on up to Continental Divide, the Fremont Pass, 11,300, about 18 miles up the road, traveling under Avalanche Pass at every 15 years or so. Hit the high point, Fremont Pass, dropped down a few hundred feet on the north side of the pass, park the vans, skin up, and head up a north-facing slope, eventually to 12,000 feet, up onto the summit of Chalk Mountain, big flat mountain top up there, probably an old peneplain, great fetch area for the Cornish development. On the way up, do our pits. I like doing pits in Summit County because you never have to dig very deep. You always have shallows, and you can always find some development of facets, depth 4. And 2 things occurred to me in our pit. One was that there was a good chance that I would trigger an avalanche once we get to the top of Chalk Mountain. Now let me back up here a little bit. Coming from a bomb-throwing, gun-shooting, root-running background, but when I had courses, I used explosives as a tool. You could get away with it back in the 70s and 80s. No one was out in the backcountry. We had just discovered skinny skis, double boots, the glue-on skins. Those old strap-on skins were terrible. Real seal skins, and then mohair, and then finally glue-on skins. And so I used explosives as a tool with a course. You look at the terrain, you dig your pit. We had one shear test, the shovel shear test in those days. You do your shear test. And are we going to get an avalanche? And so the first thing was, I think there's a high probability of producing an avalanche on this particular avalanche path that I'll describe in a moment. The second thing was, oh God, did I throw in my pull wire igniters? Looking back on that day, from that period on, my mind was part mush, and I don't know what the rest of it was. But I was so intent on how are we going to light that fuse with matches? 12,000 feet in Colorado, where there's always some wind, right on the Continental Divide, without a 3-cent full wire igniter. You could buy a box of full wire igniters for $3 in those days. The quality control sucked, but they were cheap. So on up to the summit of Chalk Mountain. Well, the first thing is that I've got to keep everybody back, so my mind was partly working. Fortunately, I had these mountaineering type instructors working with me who made sure their students stayed back. To describe the avalanche path, it faced east, and we were at 12,000 feet, looking down at the highway about 1,300 vertical feet below. My estimate of the starting zone of the avalanche path in question was about 10 acres. Not a trivial starting zone. Generally faced east. A nice bowl. I suspect it might have been initially carved by the last ice age. It kind of had that appearance. Nice fetch area. Where we were standing, skier's right, slightly north aspect. As it wrapped around, there was slightly the south aspect. Got to keep everybody back. Students go over here, where they have a view that there was kind of a little projection out there where they could stand in a very safe spot. We were over to the skier's right. And back up a little bit here. When we first got there, I jumped out of my skis, left the skins on, poles on the uphill side of the skis on a 6-degree slope. Tiptoe down a little bit so we can look around, and good place to throw the bomb right here. Not a big cornice development here, it just kind of rolled over. Never been there in the summer, so I don't know exactly what the terrain's like, but the skiers left, there was a nice typical Colorado cornice. Some of the biggest cornices I've seen in the lower 48 are along the Continental Divide in Colorado. Time to arm the bomb. I was using Kennepack. The nitromethane was mixed with the fertilizer. Stick the fuse in. Pull everything out of my pack looking for the pull wire igniters. No pull wire igniters. Having to light the fuse with matches in a wind at 12,000 feet is not easy. Took 2 or 3 attempts, probably about 15 minutes. We finally got the fuse going. Once the fuse is burning, things happen fast. So make sure everybody was back. I needed to repack my pack. Handed the bomb to one of the instructors, said, toss that out there. He said, how far? Well, just ways past my skis. And then everybody back. Somebody said, oh, what about your skis? And I said, it's too late now. So 5 to 6 degree slope. Bomb goes off. Tiptoe out there, past my skis, and we did produce an avalanche. The avalanche was just a little bit of new snow, around about 30 centimeters. It ran perhaps 40 meters down the slope. Jumped down onto the slope because right there was no cornice. Slowly walked down, look around, feeling my mind still was not in gear. My focus was off. Turn around, and all of a sudden you get that feeling, what am I doing here? Things begin to finally click. First of all, my reaction was, okay, we got a little avalanche. When you unload a slope, the stability goes up, all right? When you load a slope, the stability goes down. It becomes more unstable. And secondly, I thought all of a sudden, I forecasted a deep slab avalanche, and we didn't get it. And here I am out stomping around on the slab. And at that moment, I started to walk back uphill, and of course, you know what happened. The entire bowl collapsed, the big collapse. Fortunately, on skier's right, the slab is only about 50 centimeters deep. So I have practiced this before, being out on a slope without skis. You hear the slope. You run uphill as fast as you can, and it worked this time. I was actually going downhill, but I was outrunning the slab. Climb up on the top. out. By then it was time to pack up, take the skins off, move back, move out, go back down to the vans and head back for dinner. And I look around, no skis. Only my poles sitting there. So in 6 degrees, my skis got taken down. So, what happened? Well, to review, on our level 2 courses at Alta, the snow safety director in the late 70s and 80s, up until the early 90s, a fellow by the name of Ono Waringa, would give us a talk on what it's really like to be a snow safety director, the human aspect of being a snow safety director. He would talk to us about how his patrollers would try and outguess him and how he would handle that situation. His biggest emphasis was on focus. You got to keep your focus. As an example, he said, well, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which we did. I would occasionally stay with him there at Alta when I was running horses. Get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, take your obs, begin to plan your control day. Shoot the guns, how you're going to run the routes, what patrollers are going here, and doing this and that and the other. It's all set in your mind, and you're walking out the door. Your girlfriend says, what about our relationship? or he says, if you're going to fly with the eagles during the day, you can't stay up with the owls at night. I wish I had recorded that talk. I've never heard another talk as good as Anna can give on what it's like to be a snow safety director from the human aspect. Well, what happened with me is that when I began to worry about how I was, first of all, did I throw in the pull wire igniters just in a little stuff sack, waterproof stuff sack that should have been in the bottom of my pack? Turned out they weren't there, and I was so focused on getting that bomb lit that I wasn't thinking about anything else. I wasn't thinking about what would happen if the bomb did not produce the full depth deep slab avalanche. Secondly, so that's the human factor. Now about slab boundaries. Whenever we are out there running a route with a continental snowpack with depth floor, or more typically a continental light snowpack with a depth floor that's not that well formed, always, and I underline always, expect limits, your slab boundary to exceed, and in particular the crown, its normal limits. Always, no exceptions. So what happened with some of these avalanches that I mentioned? The 1964 avalanche there at Snow King was a good friend of mine. We skied together, hunted together. He was kind of stubborn. I was just picking up on everything I could about avalanches. I knew nothing about snow, but I was starting to learn about avalanches in the early 60s. And I recall one incident during a high hazard period there on our little local ski hill where we were getting avalanches on the front side. It's a north-facing slope. We had a good depth for here. And there was some question as to whether we should sweep a certain run, which had not been skied that day. And he wanted to ski it. He wanted to sweep it. And the old guards there that I like to listen to, the old Forest Service, Park Service guys who've been patrolling there, mountaineer types, said, I don't think we should do it. And there was, some discussion on that. And finally, my friend relinquished his desire to see that run. So, he kind of had an attitude there. Had he survived that avalanche, I think he would have been an excellent avalanche worker. What was going on with the other folks there? Roberto, what was he thinking? What were Kessler, Sadi, and Snyder thinking? And here again, I suggest that you get a hold of Snowy Torrents 80 to 86 and review those two accidents by Nick Logan and Dale Atkins. Good reading, good lessons there. Birkeland has an interesting comment that we were talking about right at the beginning of the day here.
Well, Rod and I were just talking about, patrollers dying, and I think for all of us in the industry, obviously, it's really, it really hurts when you hear about, avalanche professionals dying in avalanches. And one of the points I was making to Rod was just that, sometimes we're seeing these guys die that have been patrolling for 25 years at places. And we think, well, geez, 25 years, that's a really long time. I mean, the breadth of experience there is huge. But when you look at things more on less of a human time scale and more on a geologic time scale or just on an avalanche path time scale, like 25 years is not much. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen on a given avalanche path that you won't see in 25 years. So, I'm not very familiar with a lot of these avalanche accidents. I know the one at Alpine Meadows, I've talked to some folks out there, and one of the things they said was just that, there was a standard way of running that route, and they were running the route the standard way. And, this guy had been running the route for 25 years, and they'd never seen the snow pull up as far as it did. They'd never seen the fracture come that high. But also they had different conditions than usual. They had, there was an ice crest and some facets, and it got buried really quickly by a big slab. So they had unusual conditions. They had sort of these standard ways of running stuff, and then things pulled out a lot higher than they expected and took them down. And so I think what I was saying to Rod is that I think in a lot of ways, as professionals, we have to be careful not to say, well, in our experience at this ski hill, this is where this always breaks, or this is how far this runs, or whatever. We have to more think of it in terms of what is the potential for this given path. Given what we're seeing on the path, where the slope changes angles, where, how far it could possibly run, and especially recognizing when we have unusual conditions. And when we have those unusual conditions, really backing way back off for some of these things. So that was just kind of Rod's and mine discussion over coffee this morning.
When I would go around to the various ski areas, and I would hit most of them back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s in Colorado, I like to see the patrollers run their route with an attitude of, we're running the route for the conditions that we think are out there today. A lot of times I would see the route runners just throwing the bombs in standard locations, running the route by the numbers. When the Jackson hole opened, I always carried extra explosives with me. It was easy to get rid of in those days, you just take your fuse out, stick it in your pocket, and threw the bomb in your pack, and ride the tram back up. With the public, no one cared. Now it's harder to get away with that kind of stuff now. This was long before Ocean Dawn.
That the Aspen Highlands incident with Kessler and his buddies, that all three of them were experienced ski patrollers. 2 days after the avalanche occurred that killed the three of them. It was to be the Colorado Professional Ski Patrol Party at Alpine Meadows, or at, Aspen Highlands. Aspen Highlands is the poured below the tracks cousin of the rest of the Aspen ski areas. It was very important for Highlands to put on a really good demonstration of their skiing on Highlands Bowl. Highlands Bowl was always closed to the general public at that time. Now it's open in part through some efforts that actually came out of that action. It's a long story. But the human factor to get Aspen Highlands Bowl open for the ski patrol party in the early spring there was a major part of that incident. They rarely, if ever, had been out there doing control work at Highlands Bowl at that time. There was nobody skiing there. There was no compaction. It was essentially an untouched slope. They didn't quite have the sensibility to respond to that pressure by saying, no, we're not going to do that. And so the human factor of the pressure really was a big, major factor in that particular incident.
You read the accident report in Snowy Torrance, and there was a lot of discussion on whether or not they should go out there. The three snow safety boys said, we are not going to get an avalanche, but we'll go out there anyway. We'll run the route by the numbers. And they neglected to traverse out of the bowl, and that thing broke above them. So there's a pattern here. Facets, which I'm using the generic term depthor, and slab boundaries, and keep our focus. Don't lose our focus when we're out there running routes. So I got an interesting email that was forwarded on to me by the new owners of AAI. Every now and then somebody would call up, or now they send an email and said, do you have a record of that course? I lost my course completion card. So this guy remembered that course. And this is what he had to say about that day. Snow is elastoplastic. It stretches and breaks. Rod was a hoot, especially on the slope we were studying on Chalk Mountain slid, and he lost his skis.